People think you show up to work, you answer emails all day. Even better, you forward emails to peers and just say thoughts, question mark. You're instantly replying to things on Slack and your text messages. I don't think people realize how shallow that is. And you feel fulfilled because you were doing things all day long, right?
We are in the information age, not this industrial age like back in the day. And back then, I can't stand you looking at yourself. Back then, everything was just productivity. Like, how productive can you be? But now it's shifting. And David Perel has that quote. It's like, industrial age, that's when it was all about hard work. We're in the information age.
Yes.
Now it's all about obsession. And obsession in the Cal Newport sense
because, sorry, before we get to Cal Newport, you want to say it?
Deep work.
Could not go without that. The information age being like, things now are more easily accessible. The world is flatter than it's ever been, ever. And we're at this point where, like, you can, first of all, a lot of things you do can be easily replicated by a high school student, a college student. They can, in a lot of ways, be taken into account by artificial intelligence or Googling things. That's the information age, at least as I understood it. It's just so much of it. And if you're just doing that stuff, you're gone.
Okay, it's like two sides of the coin, right? You have this global world, all this information, all this technology that is just making the silly work, the
shallow
work. Shallow work. That's just going to the wayside. So we got to figure out our advantage in the world is depth. That's where we can go, and it's just focusing on one thing for several hours, at least an hour at a time. No distractions. This is you just crushing it. That's kind of what I do with these book clubs.
What I was just looking up is depth, meaning 1, mastering really hard things, and then 2, producing at an elite level. That's what you get from depth.
And you're not going to do that from a state of just working, but emails in the background, Facebook's there,
text
you're
messages,
getting notifications.
Pings, right. There's a lot of good stuff. Where do you want to go with it?
Well, one, I want to clear up. First, we'll go with what is deep work. We kind of already clarified that. Why is it important? We talked a little bit about that. And then lastly, like, how can people really embrace it in their lives to take advantage of it? Because it's so rare now. Like, we used to have like the Walden type authors or whatever that go in the woods and just sit by themselves and just write and create.
Right.
And we need to start to replicate that.
J.K. Rowling did at one point in this book.
That was cool, actually, because there was a couple examples of people using deep work in their day-to-day life, and it's just, there are different ways of doing it, but J.K. Rowling rented a hotel, 5-star hotel. Yeah. She had the money, but like just sits and creates and creates and creates in that environment that's suitable for her. There are different ways, like, you can do that. There's another guy that bought a flight to Tokyo.
By the way, flight to Tokyo, sure. You don't have to go to a 5-star hotel to do that. It's more about, I think they called it the grand gesture, but it's about like getting out of your day-to-day routine. Maybe you go work at a new coffee shop today, and having that new environment like stokes the motivation within you to keep going.
I want to clarify, though, there is, like, you don't want to change the environment every time necessarily. That's probably not good, because they want to make it like a habit, because I guess we'll get into it, but there's the routine aspect. Like, if you're changing environments, you're not going to have that instinctual, like you just do. Too many people are like, oh, I recognize deep work is important, but they just don't do it because they don't set up the environment right. They don't have the routine.
Oh yeah, so that was interesting. It's kind of lays out the 3 vignettes, 3 people that are really good deep workers in chapter 1. And the inverse of those 3 people, it was like Nate Silver, John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins, the guy who wrote Ruby on Rails. And then the antithesis to those people was, well, what about Jack Dorsey? Because he's, running around, really scattered. He had Twitter, and then he went and founded Square. And the author was like, don't use the Jack Dorsey example as like a means for why your shallow work is okay.
Right.
You're like, oh, well, Jack Dorsey did it, so like I can continue being shallow.
They basically say Jack Dorsey can do that because he has everyone else doing the deep work for him. and they're just aggregating it.
Right. It's literally his job as an executive to be bouncing around. He can't possibly sit down for 6 hours at a meeting and indulge in the deep work of doing that. He has to be, in order for those things to run, like that's just what he has to do.
That's what's funny to me too, is like, well, one, Bill Gates, like at the beginning, when you're the actual creator, that's when you need the deep work. But
Yes.
when you're more so the manager, you don't need quite as much of it, I think.
No, and I think it'd be a detriment too if like everyone's looking for you to manage the company and you're like, I'm sorry, I need to write this novel. Or if it's related, like if Steve Jobs was like, I just need to make this one iPhone. Like, no, he was doing a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I think that's where there are different ways of going about it. People in different scenarios, like maybe they have a boss and like the boss is like, hey, you got to be on call 24/7. There's this set of like, just have expectations. Like I'll be on call for this amount of time, but then the rest is like, that's my deep work period.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you can't go to a boss, or you could go to a boss and be like, hey, I don't want to do 100% shallow work. I don't think that's in your best interest. So let's set up an arrangement where this can work.
I think that's because people don't know what shallow work is, right? It's like people think you show up to work, you answer emails all day. Even better, you forward emails to peers and just say thoughts, ? You're instantly replying to things on Slack and your text messages. I don't think people realize how shallow that is. And you feel fulfilled because you were doing things all day long, right?
Can I talk to you for a second about how many trips to Menard you're making?
Oh,
Menards. I don't even know the name of it, but you're there every day, at least 3 times a day.
Why is that? It's not deep work related.
It's so shallow. I like
It's
that
shallow,
you set up that
100%.
little light thing.
It's 100% shallow. That's why I try and like all that shopping, right, for the van. When I ordered like big materials for this, I make sure I go online and I pay the $80 to have it delivered here to the door. Because when I was like working with my dad on a project and we spent 2 hours in Menards, I'm like, well, $100 an hour here, $100 an hour there. It's bad news.
That's been your life the last couple of days.
Here's what you have to do when it comes to building things. And this is what Adam Savage sets out to do. You need to have your studio and your workshop needs to just be a mini hardware store in and of itself. So that when it's late on a Tuesday like today, like you don't have to run to Menards. You just hit the cabinet and that's where we're getting. But it is really shallow.
A lot of shallow work. I think a cool point, I sent this article to you yesterday about the reason why.
I skimmed. Paul Graham?
Yeah, it's called The Lesson to Unlearn.
Mm.
And it's basically talking about the vestiges of the industrial age where people would just look for busyness. Busyness is the test, the metric of how productive, how much you're contributing to the company.
And we've talked about it. That was a point in the world where you could be worth nothing, work as hard as you want, and be upper middle class. That was just fact of the matter. Like input equaled output, and output was really good benefits, good pay, good unions. It was all those things. Information age, that's not true anymore.
Yeah, so you get people that just want, I mean, I used to do this at my restaurant. It was like, if you weren't looking busy, they'd tell you to clean shit. And I'm like, I don't want to clean. So I just run away. I would run and hide in the ice room. It was hilarious. We'd go and like throw ice at each other in the ice room just to not be near the boss. But that's the case. It's just like the test is how busy do you look? People replying all to their email, like pretending that they're doing stuff, but that's not actually getting anything done. And the problem that Paul Graham says is when you have authorities making these tests. So these tests being like, oh, I'm going to look as the metric. How much stuff are you like saying or doing, whatever. But that doesn't quantify the depth, the quality of the work.